I'm posing for Paul's camera. And upcoming on June the 6th, the Arizona Voter Choice Executive Team will be here to lead a presentation on ranked choice voting. So if you've heard that term, you might want to show up on June the 6th here at 10 a.m. to find out what it's all about and be a part of that discussion. So make it the 7th. So if you show up here on Tuesday, I won't be here, so thank you, John and Sandy, for keeping me straight. We care for the month of May and June. We do care, and we try to help the community. This month we are helping the Sahuarito Food Bank. The Green Wagon is back there every month during our programs. You're welcome to bring things. There's a list there in front of the wagon if you want to pick and choose, or you can take it to headquarters. The wagon is down there every week too. Our guest today is Lynn Davis. She's the director of the Jewish Community Relationship Council for Tucson and Southern Arizona. She has spent the bulk of her career in a nonprofit arts administration and Jewish communal life, creating valuable-based experiential programs that amplify the works of local artists, engage audiences, and celebrating the diversity of Southern Arizona. She is a power converter and a collaborator who believes firmly in the power of partnership and building community. And those are tongue twisters for a guy without a front tooth. Please welcome Lynn Davis. Lynn, thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you so very much for having me. As George mentioned, I am here from the Jewish Community Relations Council for Tucson and Southern Arizona, and I will talk about that for just a little bit. I was initially invited to come give a talk about anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism and the current state of the state, if you will, and I politely, I hope, demurred and switched tactics just a little bit, and I will explain why. But first of all, is anyone here familiar with a JCRC? One, fantastic. JCRCs, Jewish Community Relations Councils, have been around since the 1940s and arose even, I think, before World War II had ended in the United States, were a way of educating, advocating, and activating around issues of concern for the Jewish and greater communities, and were very much a way for Jews to help Jews integrate themselves, many of whom were immigrants at that time, into American society. JCRCs are primarily a community relations arm. And this came from, again, so this goes back to the middle of the last century. Opposition to all forms of discrimination or segregation based on race, religion, color, or national origins is inherent in our religious heritage and the prophetic tradition, and is a cardinal tenet of Jewish community relations. So the beautiful thing to me about JCRC work is that it really does, it is firmly grounded in Jewish values. JCRCs work very much in a space that is about protecting a healthy civil society, grounded in the belief that Jews and other marginalized communities, all marginalized communities, can only thrive in a healthy democracy, healthy civil society. And so I thank you all for being here in that capacity and for the work that you do. So I do want to start with anti-Semitism, though, because it is a big piece of what we're going to talk about. Because I have started saying, when people ask me about the work that I do, I have started saying, yes, JCRCs are here to fight anti-Semitism and other forms of hate, because they are all inextricably linked, and we'll talk about that a little more, too. But I wanted to talk about Jews and Jewishness just a little bit as a jumping off point, because being Jewish can mean very different things to very different people. And I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but if you just take a moment of reflection and think about what comes to mind for you when you hear Jew or Jewish. What messages did you get as a kid? What messages did you get from your family of origin? Do you have Jewish friends? Have you been to a Jewish holiday? Have you, do you think primarily of a biblical Jew, of a difference between Old and New Testament? Do you think of Jews as primarily religious people and very observant? Do you think of Jewish being a cultural thing? We'll get to this in a sec. Is it about holidays and observance? Is it about food? I've been known to call myself a culinary Jew. I cook for holidays. That line's never going to get old. Or is the first thing that comes to mind for you Israel? I neglected to say, feel free at any time to interrupt if you have questions, if I use a term that's not familiar, if you, please don't be shy. The multitude of identities contained in that word is important. One of the things about all these photos is that everyone in there is white. And that's not necessarily what Jews look like. Jews of color are a thing, whether they are American Jews, whether they are Ethiopian Jews who have immigrated to Israel or not, whether they are Jews by choice, whether they are Sephardic Jews who may have Ladino roots, so Jews who were expelled from Spain once upon a time during the Crusades and made their way east instead of west and ended up in places like Turkey and Lebanon and Egypt. So there is a diversity within the Jewish experience, just as much as there is a diversity in any other experience, and it's important to keep that in mind. So then we get to the elephant in the room. No elephant on there, I guess. So, what is anti-Semitism? It is very simply, on one hand, hatred of Jews, right? In some forms, it is about questioning the Jews' right to exist, the Jews' right to a homeland. It's a prejudice like every other in some ways, and unlike others as well. It has its roots go back for centuries. It is based in Christian hegemony. The term anti-Semite, anti-Semitic did not come around until the end of the 19th century, though, however. And when we think of anti-Semitism, we can think of slurs, we can think of violence, we can think of the Holocaust, quite obviously. We can think of Jews being kept from joining country clubs or other civic groups. But what is interesting is that anti-Semitism and other forms of prejudice need to be looked at and thought of as the canary in the coal mine. When we see identity-based hate or violence on the rise, it is often in response to other social tensions and people looking for a scapegoat. Okay? Does that need definition? Does that sound familiar? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And all these places, these different ways of different manifestations of anti-Jewish hate, they are all myths, right? So blood libel is a myth. The fact that Jews killed small children for sacrifice, it's a myth. That Jews hold all the power is a myth. That Jews killed Jesus, even the Catholic Church has decided that that's not the case. That Jews can't be loyal to a government, a nation state, a state like the United States. That Jews are torn and have two loyalties. Not true. It is, it's about people looking for excuses, looking for someone to blame, poverty, inflation, immigration on something or someone, rather than examine root causes. Anti-Semitism today. So I'm sure that you've all heard recently how anti-Semitism and other acts of hate are on the rise. And it's true. I'll get to the ADL's heat map in just a sec, that shows incidents across the country, across the state, across our communities. I think it's fair to say that in the last 6 years, especially if you look at 2016 to 2020, there was, for example, I think it's easy to feel like hate was unleashed or given a platform that it didn't have for a very long time. I think it's safe to say that hate was also given permission. And There are so many factors that play into this. I mean, if we look at the internet, if we look at social media, if we look at the speed with which ideas can spread, and if we even look to ourselves and think how quickly we may share something without doing a deeper dive and really determining its authenticity, these messages risk getting normalized. And the more we hear them, the more familiar they sound, and the more accustomed we become. So part of fighting anti-Semitism, fighting identity-based hate and bias, is being aware, is being vigilant, is being self-aware, and really, always being on the alert for the memes that your friends are sending that you would normally just discard. And it isn't just anti-Semitism. One of the reasons that it's so important for me personally to talk about this and other forms of hate, yes, anti-Semitism is on the rise. Yes, I will wager that people in this room are shocked to hear us talk about anti-Semitism in a way that we haven't for 70-some years, and that it is part of current conversation. And nowhere in this country is anti-Semitic legislation at risk of being enshrined in state houses the way anti-LGBTQ laws are, and risks to reproductive health access. Okay? So these are all intertwined. It's all about power, it's all about roots of power, it's all about who holds it. That's probably another talk. But it's both things, right? It's both things. And I think that's very important. And I think, probably jumping ahead, but that's why it's critical that the Jewish community is creating allies, so the Jewish community has allies. A tenet of JCRC work, of community organizing, is you can't make friends in a crisis. So you need to be making your friends now. People need to know what you stand for, whom you stand for, so that if you need them, if you have the time of need, you know who your collaborators are. And I think the other problem with this rise of rhetoric, hate rhetoric and hate speech, is that a speech can turn into action. There is a group called Over Zero that has done most of their work internationally, in Croatia, in African republics, that have studied the prevalence of certain forms of speech and the translation into actual violence. Typically they're going in after genocides and after incidents of mass casualties into areas of conflict, and really being able to tease apart the rhetoric and the language and the messaging in the media, on the radio, in the newspapers, that was able to, frankly, incite violence. It was founded by this brilliant woman, wonderful, amazing people doing that work. They're turning their attentions to Arizona. And they are looking for a statewide outreach coordinator in Arizona. Find this online, and I'll have some resources for you afterwards. This is the ADL's, the Anti-Defamation League's HEAT map. HEAT is an acronym. It stands for Hate, Extremism, Anti-Semitism, and Terrorism. This is the first of its kind interactive and customizable map. It's really a brilliant tool that details specific incidents of hate, extremism, etc. And it lets you, if you can do a deep dive on the website and read details as deep as you want to go, if you have the stomach for it. Last year, 2022, which is the year that we have, the most recent year that we have numbers for, the ADL tracked more incidents of anti-Semitic hate, language, violence, etc., than they had since they started counting in 1979. Okay, it's a cause for concern. The good news is the numbers in Arizona went down a little bit, but Arizona makes up a very small percentage of that overall number, and I think it's important that we not be complacent. right? And I think it's important that we acknowledge that this is a process, that this is work, that this takes engagement, this takes conversations like this in this room, and conversations with your neighbors, and conversations with your bridge group and your knitting group and whoever that might be. But when you dial in on this map, you can see where Arizona is. You can see the incidents that they've chosen to highlight. And you can do a deeper dive, and you can get all the way into Tucson if you want. The one thing that I'm not sure if this is included in their anti-Semitic incidents, one of the things that we have seen in Tucson, and if this has happened here, I'd be very curious to know, is we've seen what are called flyering incidents. And this is when someone goes through a neighborhood with a bunch of baggies, sandwich bags filled with corn. It's important that they're weighted with corn and not rocks, because then they're, not pebbles, because then they're not throwing rocks. All of this is designed to really skirt the edge of what constitutes vandalism or hateful activity. So baggies filled with corn and really, really, really vile flyers. So it's pamphleteering, essentially. And what this has happened. It happened just a couple weeks ago. It happened six months ago or so. Different parts of town. Some parts of town Tucson is interesting because in East Coast communities, often you'll have a Jewish area of town. That's not Tucson. Jews are everywhere. Jews are in San Hughes. They're in the foothills. They're in the eastern side. So there's no Jewish neighborhood per se, the way there might be otherwise. But we encourage people to let the sheriff's department know, and actually I had a conversation with someone just yesterday before I left work, and she had called the sheriff's department, and she was really frustrated because it's not prosecutable. It's very hard to find who's doing it, and she was really anxious she really wanted to have a course of action. What we do, Tucson has a Tucson Jewish Community Safety Team. We have two folks who are both former TPD that work with all of our agencies in Tucson, either to do security plans or to do trainings or to do briefings. And we offer them to go out and talk to an HOA and say, listen, this is designed to incite. This is designed to upset you. This does not necessarily, at this moment, reflect other anti-Semitic activity in our community. We discourage you from sharing the photos on social media. And I think this is a very fine line. We don't want to amplify these messages. We don't want to be part of the distribution network for these images. They're vile. They're awful. We do want neighbors and neighborhoods to be aware. And so what I'm going to do is go out week after next. She's going to, spend the next week rallying her troops. Apparently, they have a rowdy women's group that has been around since 2016. Again, no coincidence there. But we're going to talk about what it means for a neighborhood to rise against this, right? To be the sort of neighborhood where this hateful activity can't gain a foothold. And I think, I'm jumping to the end of my talk, I think that's our work, right, is to create a climate, create an environment where that behavior is not welcome, not accepted, and gets shut down very quickly. Yes?
You described that they had baggies of corn with pile. What do they do?
They're tossing them in driveways.
Okay.
Yeah, and so people are finding them on their front porches, and yeah.
And then moving on to how a community reacts to that. Mm-hmm. What can a community do?
Well, that's what we're going to start talking about, right? We're going to start talking about, the conversations that we need to have, the messaging that we need to do. Do we start, it's Community Organizing 101. For example, we are going to start neighborhood by neighborhood to build awareness so that when people get these flyers, they're not shocked, they're not surprised, they don't feel ambushed or assaulted by them. We want to get the messaging out ahead of time that we don't want people sharing it on social media. We want to give people the tools to get more information so they can get a real threat assessment. So they have a what's the word I'm looking for? A reasonable grasp of what threats and concerns might be. And one of the ideas that was launched just in this conversation is, what would that look like if we took that across Tucson and got to a place where we could have this critical mass that we could call Tucson a kind community, or an inclusive and affirming community where this stuff doesn't stand. What is interesting, and I'm taking a small detour, I don't know if any of you here are familiar with Bookman's in Tucson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's been around 30 years. And you may have heard that a month or so ago, Bookman's was going to have a drag story hour at their Northwest location, and the Bridge Christian Church got very ugly and shut it down. We've been working with Bookman's to reschedule that. It should happen early July. Got a great group of interfaith community members, together to support this. It was important for Bookman's that it be in, if at all possible, in a faith-based location as sort of a, pardon me, screw you to the Bridge Christian Church. But as we were having some of these first meetings, people in the room were saying, but this isn't my Tucson, right? This isn't my community. This isn't what I've come to expect from this place where I've spent the last 30 years. Tucson is affirming. Tucson is welcoming. Tucson is inclusive. And I had a good friend in the room who has been very involved in working in anti-trans and LGBTQ stuff for the last couple of years. I mean, as an advocate, as a very strong youth advocate, both across the state and nationally. And she said, you're right. This is not your community. And what we need to realize is this is outside money. This is outside information. These are very well-funded initiatives coming from right-wing think tanks, and that are finding that foothold, that are finding an opportunity to do their work here. School boards are another place that are really, really contentious right now, where folks, who don't have kids in the district are running for school boards to promote really conservative agendas, and people are caught off guard, people are caught unawares, and left saying, but that's not the community that I've come to know. And so it's engagement, it's information, it's knowledge, it's all of those things, and it's a process. I wish I had a magic bullet for you, but I don't. Yeah.
Like the advocate, the group that does it for the kids about Be Kind, Ben's.
Yeah, Ben's Bells. Uh-huh.
And their motto of that. I mean, that's the kids that we're teaching them.
Yep.
That needs to go to the adult side of it. Just
Bonnie, you should mention that. Hold that thought. I don't want to say anything about Ben's Bells yet, but yes.
Well, I just would think that the first place you would turn to in regard to the churches. And are they united in trying to fight this?
Yeah, it's been very interesting for me. I've gotten sort of a crash course in, interfaith, in Christian denominations in an interfaith space. What I have found is there are some fabulous, really involved, committed, engaged Christian spaces in Tucson. And when we were talking to, who are doing very meaningful social justice work and have for a very long time, and when we were talking to the congregation that has offered to host, we had a meeting with their church council, because like any sort of volunteer organizational structure, right, there's a lot of levels to go through to get a final stamp on something. But I said, we're very grateful. I appreciate the risk that you are taking, putting yourselves out there like this and taking a stand. But this is a congregation who, for years, has done work to be labeled affirming and inclusive. And I think, and it's easy for me to say because, but I think it's very important for interfaith coalitions to grow up around this so they are not all painted with the same brush. If you don't want your church to be lumped in with the ones that are, spreading hate, you can't be silent. You can't be silent. You have to, we have to, the rest of us have to reclaim the narrative. So I'm sure I jumped over all sorts of things that I meant to say, but JCRCs very much are working in an interfaith space. and we are working, we call them issues of common concern for the Jewish community and the community at large, right? And that's where a lot of this work happens, is around issues of people are doing work. People are doing work, and some meaningful work at a lot of different levels. You may have heard a week or so ago that what was Senate Bill 1713 was signed into law by the Arizona State Legislature. This is a grant program, so small and medium-sized nonprofit houses of worship are eligible for up to $100,000 a year over 5 years for security improvements to their facilities. The whole number is $5 million over 5 years. For the last several years, there has been a Homeland Security program called the Nonprofit Security Grant. And many Tucson Jewish organizations, and I presume others, have benefited from it. The only problem is, if there's anyone in this room who's done grant writing, and if there's anyone in this room who has, gone through a federal grant process, both pursuing it and reporting on it, they're onerous, right? It's not a small task, and it's a very difficult task for a small organization or an organization with a small staff. In addition, the federal program has been reimbursement-based, so if a congregation, a church, the Tucson Jewish Museum, did not have the money that they needed up front to do whatever they wanted to do, it was out of reach. What's beautiful about this is that it is a grant that gives the monies right away for organizations to spend. And it covers training, it covers, new alarm systems, it covers any number of... has anyone here been to the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center? Wonderful, great. That's where I am currently working out of. JCRC here is a program of the Tucson Jewish Museum. This is our courtyard, and our neighbor immediately to the south is Prince Chapel AME, American Methodist, and both buildings have experienced violence, or vandalism rather. Both of us had air conditioning units, cannibalized for copper wiring in the last year. They've had things books thrown through their windows. They've had small fires set on their campus. They are also eligible for these resources, for these funds. And we are both located. We're South Tucson adjacent. We're south of downtown, and I can only think that building safer campuses will help make a safer community ultimately. Has anyone seen this little blue square? Excellent. Other than on my lapel, do you know what it means?
Yes. Stand up to Jewish hate.
Stand up to Jewish hate. So this is a campaign, a nationwide campaign that launched from the Foundation to Combat Antisemitism. Robert Kraft, under the Patriots, put the seed money up for it and put the project together, started the foundation. And it is kind of brilliant in a couple different ways. The symbol is this little blue square, and their goal is to have this blue square become as ubiquitous as the AIDS ribbon or the breast cancer ribbon or the pride rainbow, so that when a community experiences, whether it's a disaster or something to celebrate, that there is a symbol to sort of gather around, unite around. When they launched this on national TV in, I think it was just early May, they had the pixel was like showing up on the TV screen. They launched it during The View and I think one of the morning shows, and it was there for a while. And then a bunch of their videos are on their website, and they're very interesting. They're very provocative. This little thing is bopping around. Well, the reason they chose that size is because it represented 2% of the overall real estate of a television screen. Jews represent plus or minus 2% of our overall population in the United States and experience something like 46% of identity-based and hate-based violence. So it's a pretty powerful thing. The other beauty of it, one second, is that little blue square is something that already exists as an emoji on your smartphone. And so if you want to, hashtag blue square, if you want to use it in a message or use it in your social media signature. They have, frames for your Facebook profile, and it's already there. So you don't have to go download something to show your support.
I've seen several times on the television ad with that, and it is a very powerful ad.
Yeah, their ads are good. Also nationally, and this just happened on Thursday, I believe, the White House was able to announce the launch of the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. And this is really lovely and brilliant and amazing. Represents a lot of work. Over 100 stakeholders who were part of crafting this process. There are 4 pillars of it. The 4 things that they are looking to do in this effort. Increase awareness and understanding of anti-Semitism. And back to the anti-Semitism in general and the conspiracy theory piece of it, it's really crucial that we pay attention, because if there is a group of people who is willing to blame one group, one ethnicity, one racial group, one demographic group, immigrants, whatever it might be, for any host of problems, that means that they don't believe in the democratic process, right? There isn't one person or one group making all these decisions, right? Defining our school curricula, defining our immigration policy, running the banks, running Hollywood. It's all a process, and it's all a very engaged and engaging process that, involves, represents hundreds of thousands of people. And so the important, critical piece, if you come away with nothing else today, is that anti-Semitism and other forms of hate are anti-democratic, fundamentally.
Yep.
All right? And there are people, that's their goal, is to subvert the process. So, bringing it up.
Let's hold our questions till
Yeah.
the end, if we would, please.
Yeah, if you can.
If you would.
Okay, 'cause I'm-
write them down. I've got paper if you want to write
Okay,
them.
great. Just a couple more slides. But no, I do appreciate you mentioning it, because that is important. So the 4 pillars of this: increase awareness and understanding, right? That it is a very real threat, and it threatens all of us. It's not just a threat to Jews. It is a threat to all of us, and the things that we in this room hold dear. Improve safety and security, and I just talked about that. This also has increased funding for the National Nonprofit Security Grant Program that I mentioned, which is great. Reverse the normalization of anti-Semitism, which we talked about, right? And start, the White House has said that they will be more vocal and about countering these narratives. They are encouraging other branches of government to use their voice and their platform to counter these narratives. And near and dear to my heart is this build cross-community solidarity and collective action to combat hate, because that's where the work lies. So what do we do? Me, JCRC, staff of 1. I have a wonderful advisory committee. So I am a program of the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. There are 125 JCRCs around the country. Most of them live within their Jewish Federation. A handful are their own nonprofit. They're standalone 501c3s. I am at the Jewish Museum for a variety of reasons that make a lot of sense in our community, not the least of which is that there's just a real affinity in the work that the JCRC is tasked with, and the museum's mission of using the lessons of the Holocaust to talk about contemporary genocides and other forms of hate. And so it is a very progressive message, and it is a place that uses education as a means of combating this polarization in our community. I've been working with the Democracy Resilience Network. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. Our former Congressman Ron Barber and a gentleman by the name of Doug Henninger in Phoenix, who was a publisher, were tapped by the Carter Center out of Emory in Atlanta so this is another interesting thing, sort of like Project Over Zero. I was shocked to learn that the Carter Center was here in 2020 in Maricopa County monitoring elections. So not Southeast Asia, not some other country rife with strife and problems, but Maricopa County monitoring elections. for fairness and access and. So the Democracy Resilience Network was involved in that. Democracy Resilience Networks, I think, are in half a dozen states, coordinated by the Carter Center. And now the work is, well, what do we need to do before 2024? And the pieces that they have chosen to focus on are increased participation in these conversations, about reducing polarization, increased participation from rural areas, increased participation from interfaith communities, members of the clergy and folks working in interfaith spaces. We have a task force working on, how do you turn down the heat on violent rhetoric and violent communication and violence around polling places, and how do you decrease instances of polarization. And so to the Ben's Bells thing, this is like 7 different layers of spin-off here, but I'm working with a task force that is looking to support school board members. The other thing, I don't know that this has happened here, but Scottsdale is really a hotbed, and even in Tucson now, we've had very, very, very contentious school board meetings. Again, amplified and driven by folks who are not invested in the community. This was also I'm talking about Catalina Foothills School District governing board meetings recently, in particular, again, instigated by the Bridge Christian Church, which, if you know, Tucson has a campus in Marana and a campus in Tanque Verde, and Catalina School District is right here. So these are not folks with kids in the district. These are not folks invested, in the policies and priorities. These are not students speaking up. These are not students who are dissatisfied with their educational experience or their campus climate. On the contrary, Catalina Foothills has had a reputation for years of being affirming and inclusive and really working to make a healthy, pro-social learning environment for their students. So this is outside instigation, and it caught parents off guard because they are used to this wonderful community. And so we need to be aware, right? We need to, and so to your point, we're going to look at the Ben's Bells model as, so we were talking about how do you get into school board spaces, for example, and turn down the heat, right? Dial it back. And I said, if I were to walk into Catalina Foothills right now, I couldn't do that. I mean, they had the sheriff's department there. The parents organized beautifully, but there was this crowd outside. After 3 weeks of this, the school board canceled an in-person meeting and said that they were going to go virtual from here on out until they figure out how to navigate this new landscape. And I said, I can't walk in there, right now and say, hey, could we just talk about something? So what we're going to try to do is find a school board, a school district, where things are not that elevated yet, and see what's working, right? Find those spaces where people with very different values and opinions are interacting. This work is about relationships, and relationships can only come out of proximity. So are people at a soccer game without getting in an argument? Are people at a farmer's market without getting in an argument? Are people at their kid's birthday party? What spaces are nurturing healthy communication, and how do we do more of that? And to the Ben's Bells point, if folks aren't familiar, Ben's Bells is it is research based, and they do have curricula that they have taken into schools and taken into workplaces to make kinder campuses. And so that's kind of the direction we want to go with that. Yeah.
I'm on the school board with the Imago Day School.
Oh,
That's the
fabulous.
school there. Just beginning on it.
Yeah.
2 of my friends are also on it from St. Francis, and one is the board president, Orgy, and who is a member here.
Okay, great.
And that is a very congenial kind of school.
Yeah, is Cameron still head of school there?
Yes, and they're trying to
We should talk.
expand. They want to expand that. It's a middle school, so they want to try to expand to include 4th graders. But they have 20 in 20 kids in each grade level, and it's totally, many are from Africa and all over
Yeah.
all over the world.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Where is this at?
Imago Dei is it's a tuition-free charter school in Tucson,
It's located right near the Linda Rodstadt.
right downtown, yeah, near the transit center.
The station right there.
Yeah.
It's IMAGO.
So let me, I don't want to take too much time, I want to wrap up and have time for questions. The other spaces in which JCRC is working is with the National Council of Jewish Women, Arizona. NCJW has been very active in the fight for reproductive health care access and abortion access, and that is exactly the work we're doing here. My goal is to build their constituency in southern Arizona, so I've just joined their statewide board. We're part of something called the Dare to Care Coalition, which is working in this school space and supporting LGBTQ youth. And we've got stuff, in the books with the YWCA, Chicanos por la Causa, Border Links, etc. The mission, the goal of a Jewish Community Relations Council is to do stuff like this, to educate and advocate and activate and really help people find ways in to the work and making meaningful change. Very much a community relations space, so very much in, but as I mentioned, it's important for us to be in interfaith spaces and to be sort of the outward working, facing piece of our Jewish community. We are involved at the state capitol and being a conduit between state and local, and a convener. So, again, interfaith spaces, neighborhoods, different groups, bringing people together because relationships are built in proximity. Look at that. I do have some resources that I can share, but again, the fact that you're all here today is beautiful and brilliant, right? This is what it's about. Be engaged, be an informed voter and an informed citizen. And the other piece of that is interrogate yourself. Be willing to question the social media, the memes that come across your desk. Familiarize yourself with the term implicit bias and start to recognize the biases that we may carry as well-meaning, left-leaning, liberal, whatever. It's still there. It's still inherent. People are tribal, and that's just our nature, and working against it takes work. That is an effort. Engage, be a voter, be a poll watcher. Explore outside your own identity and culture. I don't know if you have the opportunity to do many cultural fairs, but Tucson, form a book group to introduce yourself to something new and tease this apart with your friends. So, the other beauty of the internet is that the whole world is right there at our fingertips. And speak out. I think it's it's on all of us to be advocates. And whether it's a dinner party or a tennis game or a grocery store, I know it's scary, so practice. But we cannot afford to let these minor aggressions and oppressions go by unchallenged. Because that is how they gain legitimacy, that is how they gain currency, that is how we become inured to them, and they become part of the background fabric, and we're no longer shocked. And we need to be shocked, and we need to be angry. So again, here are some resources and tools. Happy to share with George. Some of the neat things on here, if you're not familiar with civic engagement beyond voting, they are a great statewide group. Every Sunday on their Facebook page, they have a wonderful menu of what's going through the state legislature or where bills are on any given week. They give things a thumbs up or thumbs down. They provide a very easy way to access requests to speak, which now, post-pandemic, you can no longer log comments, but you can log your opinion on any given bill, et cetera, et cetera. So, write letters, know your electeds, write op-eds, make noise, get rowdy, and thank you all very much for having me.
Okay, quickly, I know that we've been focused on ethnic, religious, cultural problems that arise with marginalized groups, particularly the Jewish community. But we're in a political atmosphere now.
Yeah.
And regrettably, changes in the government of Israel are beginning, I think, to become antithetical to the very messages that we're trying to
I
get
totally agree.
across.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that, or is there any program by ADL, JDL? Or
All sorts, I am not an Israel expert, and I feel very fortunate that my job says I deal with Israel when it affects us locally. What I do say is I'm really grateful that no one abandoned us 2016 to 2020. When our leadership was, if you'll mind me, a little off the rails. And people are flawed. Governments are flawed. Countries are flawed. Israeli people are lovely. And, it's a process and it's a struggle. And I do think the important thing is to, with whatever tools we have, to help Israel maintain a democratic process and to remain the democratic, country in the Middle East. It's not easy. And you saw all those different flavors of Jews. I mean, that's just a sampling, right? And so the country is currently being led by people with an agenda that I think is anti-democratic and oppressive to women and minorities and, et cetera, et cetera. It's not perfect. But should Jews still have a homeland? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I don't think.
Get as many questions as possible. Mark, you're next.
Thank you. Your presentation was excellent.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's the first time that this rolled out in public.
Has anybody ever tracked some of this dark money, where it's coming from?
Yes. I can't name think tanks off the top of my head, but yes, there are people keeping track, and there are people who, it's Koch brothers, it's the usual suspects. But I'm happy to find that for you too.
We're going to go to Judy first, and then next over here. Judy?
So you were talking about the Republican and the right, and I had mentioned the left, and I see and feel in conversations about, I see a connection. It's very subtle about anti-Semitic.
Say more. And because people, there may be plenty of people in the room for whom that doesn't ring a bell, so do you want to?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking. I just, when I have a conversation, there's such with someone who is left, including my own children, well, especially one, but here, even here in this community, it's not coming as a anti-quote Semitic,
right?
But there's a certain feeling of how
Just let her answer that question first. Sorry.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is, college campuses are a very difficult place to have conversations about Israel these days. The left, and again, I hesitate to use a broad brush on anything, so please excuse, this for expediency's sake. But criticism of Israel from the left, as you might imagine, comes from Israel's treatment of Palestinians, often comes from, so there's something called the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and what's the S? Anyway, which in the last several years has encouraged American corporations to remove their investments out of portfolios that supported Israeli companies, etc. And these things have gained currency. And it is a tension. It is a tension. I don't have an answer for that because, again, broad brush, can Jews be oppressors? Yes. Can Jews be oppressed? Also yes. And so it is, a lot of this work is about being able to hold conflicting and often uncomfortable positions at the same time.
It comes from many,
Yeah.
in many sizes, shapes, and colors from many political realms. I would first back here, her, and then Henny.
Me?
Yes, you.
Okay, there's our Jewish community here, which I walk by often. I don't hear anything from them, much as what you're saying. That would be a good place for us to start.
In Green Valley?
Yeah. Green Valley Temple.
In terms of showing your communal support, because I mean, I know that there are members of that congregation here in the room.
Well, no, just getting the word out to those of us that are members of the community, that we are there. And
Absolutely, absolutely.
so there's some here.
Yeah, yeah. Have a coffee, meet your neighbors.
We can put those links and information up on the bulletin board downstairs in the headquarters. Henny?
I wanted to tag on to what Judy was saying about the left and possible antisemitism. For example, a few years ago, the Women's March practically fell apart because of conflict between the black folks in that march and the somewhat, usually most of the Jewish people in that march.
Yeah. And to that, I would say the question was about, a couple of years ago at the Women's March, I believe it was it Jewish lesbians or just Jewish women who were carrying a flag with the Star of David who were not allowed to participate. And I had a thought.
Welcome to Green Valley. That's our excuse, not yours.
I said to someone the other day, it's either going to be my eyesight or my attention span that gets me first, and I don't know which it is. But these things are also, these things are both intentional and they represent real tensions and conflicts, right? So anything that sows division among other marginalized groups serves those in power, because that means we can't, gather together and rally our, call upon our collective strength and wisdom and power to fight whatever oppressive system is at work. And these are systems of oppression that are keeping, again, that's another talk. And then that gets magnified on social media, and then someone hears just a little piece of it, and then that gets repeated at the pool, and then it's, women don't like Jews, right? And so we really have to resist the oversimplification of a bunch of these things too.
I know one of the first things we did when we came to Tucson was to go up to Ben's Bells and get involved. And
Excellent.
So we carried the sticker around the back of our car till we sold the car.
Fantastic.
Richard, one last question.
Yeah, in the beginning, you said that Jesus was not responsible for...
Jews were not responsible?
Jews were not responsible for Jesus. And I always heard that they didn't believe that he was the Messiah, and they wanted to bother them,
I am not a theologian or a clergy person, so I don't feel, even my 2 years of Catholic school were a long time ago. I don't feel qualified to really tackle that.
All right, Lois, and this is our last question.
I have a master's degree in religious studies, and I taught religion in a Catholic school for 10 years. I can respond to that.
Okay, we will let you guys talk about that outside. Is there anything else besides that? I'm a reverend too, and I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. All right, if you have a question that does not relate to that, I'll let Becky answer that. Becky?
I just wondered if Tucson has an interfaith coalition.
Yes, we have a couple. Yeah.
And we'll post those down at headquarters if you'd like to go by and get some of this information that Lynn has provided us today. Let's give one more hand. Welcome hand to Lynn.
Thank you so very much. I'm just thrilled to see so many of you here, and thrilled that you are doing this work. And thank you so much for having me.
Keep in mind, mark your calendars. We're always here on the 2nd and 4th Saturdays of the month at 3 p.m. Invite your friends and neighbors. We'd like to have them come and be a part of this. You can see we have some great programs and some more coming up. You're welcome to stay. There's beer, wine, soft drinks, and Lynn will be here. So have a good one. Thank you for coming.